Hello, hello, testing, testing. Can everybody hear me?
Hello, yes, good
Hello.
evening.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, everybody. I can't believe a week has gone already, and we're back here. Just giving one or two colleagues an opportunity to check in before we begin. Let's see who's in the room so far. Letitia,
Good evening. Yes,
how are you today?
I'm good.
Oh, wonderful. By the way, does anybody know which week you're in today?
Six.
Six? Okay. Anybody agrees with that, disagrees? Are we in week 6 today? Letitia said 6.
Week 7 or 8?
7 or 8, Monique says. Okay. Are we getting warm? One said, somebody said 7 or 8. Any other takers on which week we're in? What was our first day of class?
More introductions. I think we're on week 9, actually.
Week 9. Wow, that means we're almost done. Further than I could have imagined. Javon says 9. So we have 6, 7 or 8, and 9. Does anybody know when we began our first night of class?
Was the last the 30th of was it was the end of January, the last week.
Yeah, the 30th of January was what day? What
That was
day?
a Monday.
Oh, so it's the
That
7th
was-
week.
yeah.
Okay, somebody said
7th.
it.
Yeah, it's the 7th week.
Yeah, when you said the 30th, Javon figured it out. It's the 7th week. Please make a note. We are in the 7th week beginning today, which means that we have 5 more weeks left to go already, including today. Okay, time flies when you're having fun. Okay, wonderful. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. 7 weeks. Okay. I don't see Brian yet. Yes, he's on the way. Javon is here. Right, correct, Javon? Javon is in the room. Indira.
Good evening.
Hi. Okay. Shaniqua. Not here yet. Monique.
I'm here.
Hi, Monique. Yes. Okay. One or two other questions before we move forward. Have I sent you your case study yet?
Yes, you have.
Okay. Has anybody even looked in that direction?
Yes, sir. Just a question, Mr. Wilkerson.
Okay.
You want everything in 1,000 words or less, or just the summary of the case?
Just a summary of it. You mean
That's the
the
summary. Just point one is 1,000 words or less, right? Or everything inclusive, everything you want is within 1,000 words.
That's an interesting question, Letitia.
That's the
Here's
summary.
Yeah, here's, here's why it's interesting. It's interesting because at least it proves you looked at it. Because if you didn't look at it, you couldn't come up with that interesting question, for sure. Okay, so that's the good thing about that. Now, when you say, when you ask me if I only want the summary of one section and not something else,
Yeah,
what do
yeah,
you
just
mean?
number one. Hmm?
When you say number one, what do you mean?
Okay, question one.
Okay. What is question one again?
Yeah, okay. Read and summarize the case study using 1,000 words or less.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
just for
so-
point one then.
Yeah, so just for point question
Oh
one.
my God. Okay.
Make sure you guys.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I was just being funny, Mr. Wilkerson. Sorry about that.
No need to apologize at all. Trust me, I got your point entirely. I was waiting to see if anybody else would jump in, but everybody's nothing. So yeah, um, I know it seems like blah blah blah, but remember, I don't know when was the last time somebody did a summary of any kind. But you know, a summary doesn't have any details in it. You just make out the key points. And so for question one, even though the case goes on and on and on, you would go from one paragraph to the other, just make a note of the key point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you connect the dots and make it one complete summary. That's probably the
Yeah.
easiest thing. Okay.
Okay,
Remember,
thanks.
don't put any unnecessary details in your summary, just key facts. Okay. For example, if you're reading the case and you see the dog bit the woman and then she ran down the street crying, falling down on her kneecaps and calling for God for help. What is the most important point there?
You got bit by the dog and
You
dog.
got that
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
The
she
dog,
got,
the money.
yeah, the fact that she was bitten by a
bit by the
dog.
dog. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything else is just detail.
Mhm.
Right.
Right. Which would be great if you're not writing a summary, but which is not good if you're writing a summary. You follow? And students
Yeah.
get caught all the time because they're putting in details that really should not be a part of the summary. So yeah, just a little
Okay.
thinking there. Yeah. Because remember, sometimes on your jobs, for example, you may have to provide a summary of brief report for your bosses. Bosses don't like to read long stuff. All they want are the important points. They don't want all the detail for the most part, unless somebody's trying to make you miserable. But normally, no. Okay. Brian, you came in.
Yeah, good night, I'm here.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And last but not least, I see Shaniqua joined us.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Hi, Shaniqua.
Hi.
Okay, so we're all here in the room. Hopefully, you've all had an opportunity to at least begin reading the case. Remember, I said the case is due when?
The last week
Uh,
or before.
Yeah, on
On or before
On before.
or
last week.
before the last day of class. All right, so if you're done before the last day of class, you can feel free to submit your case study. Some students still like to wait until the last day of class for some reason, but you do have until then. All right. Other key point. Thoughts on the midterm examination. Did it stress anybody? Thoughts on the midterm examination. Did it stress anybody?
Yes, it did.
Just a little.
Slight, a slight stress. A slight stress.
Yes.
I said, okay.
Uh-huh.
It
Yeah,
it got the brain going a bit.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was the idea. That was the idea. That was the idea.
Okay, accomplished.
Yeah,
Well executed on your part.
yeah, that was the whole idea. I didn't want to give you a test that you could run roughshod over and like, man, this is a piece of cake.
Oh, you surely didn't.
No.
Mm-mm.
You surely did not.
I wanted to give you something
So,
to,
so we've noticed.
yeah, yeah. And your final exam will be pretty much along those lines. So now
Oh,
you have,
really?
yeah. Okay. So you
Okay.
have experience now. you have information, you know how to approach things a little bit better. It'll be very much the same structure. Okay, and remember, your final exam will not be cumulative, which means I will not be including any questions from the first part of the semester. Only what we do from today forward. Okay? All right, good stuff, good stuff. The key is to attend the classes and to stay on top of your reading and to make your study notes or whatever you do to prepare. The other is to try to stay ahead of the game rather than trying to play catch up. Playing catch up stinks, okay? And it's unpredictable. All right. Any questions before we move forward? By the way, do you guys have up to module 7?
No, up to 5.
5. Okay, so I need to send you 3 more modules then, because we're doing 8 of them all together. All right, let me just make a note here. And module 6, 7, and 8. So everybody has the internal control module.
Yeah.
Okay, great, great. Did anybody encounter any audit issues this week in any form or fashion? Like, did you read about something, saw something at work, heard somebody in a conversation, overheard something about audit, internal or external? Anybody? Or you went a whole week without encountering anything connected to audit whatsoever? That would be a tragedy, but it's possible. No? Yeah, probably not, because you're so busy with your normal day-to-day. When was the last time somebody, question?
No, I was just commenting that in my work, I work in the bank, so the internal audit or internal controls, we're always getting information or have to provide information from them. So this, we actually have an internal audit department. So, that is something that I personally encounter or have to deal with, regularly. We always see information from that. So yes, I would have seen and encountered audit information this week.
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, based on where you work, yeah, because of the blah, 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 and the blah, 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 folks are trying to implement as much internal controls and audit controls as they possibly can. You may or may not be aware of some of the hits. How long have you worked there, Letitia? How long have you worked at that bank?
And this one for 13 years.
13. Okay, so you're familiar with all the blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And the other blah, blah, blah. All right. So yeah, the bank has gone through quite a few harrowing experience in the last 5 to 7 years, and it's now trying to get things together, and that's a good thing. And one of the keys to success is a successful internal audit program, as we'll be discussing. And the other key is to make sure that the institution is properly audited, both internally and externally, on a regular basis. I think it's a requirement anyway for financial audit to be done every year by an audit firm, so that if there's any blah, blah, blah going on, hopefully, remember, the auditors will pick it up. Did anybody get the question on frauds and error wrong, or everybody got that one right? Frauds and error.
I would hope that I got that one right.
He said, I hope so. Yeah, I put something there, I hope it's right. Okay. So, by definition then, what is a fraud?
Probably more of an intentional error.
Yeah, so if you put that, you get it right.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to put 15 words instead. If you put it's an intentional, that's fine. I'm not gonna be like, couldn't he have been more explicit? Couldn't he have elaborated? No, the correct answer is the correct answer. All right, what about an error?
Mr. Wilkinson, when will we get our results back from the exam?
Indira, to run, put right to the jugular results. Okay, Indira, it's a fair question. Today is what, Monday? You should get your results before the week is over. I will send it directly to your email once I've completed the grading. Okay, so somewhere between now and Thursday or Friday latest, you should see the results in your email for sure. All right. What made you ask that question, Indira?
Just wanted to see, how I did.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. I hated waiting for grades like every student in the world, like, oh my God, how did I do? All right. So did somebody answer that question? What's an error? Is there one type of error or two types? Did we discuss errors at all in this class? What did we say about errors?
It's
Errors are
unintentional.
intentional. Yes, that's what.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Nobody
errors
said
are-
anything for a long time and then right at the same time. What are the odds of that?
But I think you're talking, I want to say the two types, you're talking about omission and commission. Is that what
Oh,
you?
yeah, that was another discussion on errors, errors of
Oh, okay.
omission, errors of commission. But when we talk about unintentional, what are we referring to? What we talking?
Errors,
Ig-
errors that happen either out of if ignorance or if you just didn't know.
Yeah, errors, unintentional errors happen because you weren't well trained or you just didn't know. Okay, you made a mistake. And then we have those errors where it's not a mistake, where we know exactly what we are doing. And remember, we said the auditors are always going to be looking for all that kind of stuff to see what's going on. I read not too long ago this guy who was involved, this chairman or managing director, CEO. He was involved with the major Malaysian bank, 1MB, where major fraud was committed on the bank a couple of years ago. Not too long ago, millions and millions and millions of dollars went somewhere, just like FPX. But this time, they were able to indict the CEO of the bank. And not only were they able to indict him, they were able to bring him up on criminal charges. And then they were able to successfully prosecute a white collar criminal for a change. They keep getting away, but not this time. Okay. So apparently he was convicted and given 10 years in prison. And as part of that prison sentence, he had to give up some $40 million that he was able to acquire during that whole time. Okay? The point I'm making is audits of any kind, internal or external, are really supposed to be designed, first of all, to deal with financial statements and make sure that they're true and fair. Remember that. And then secondly, if frauds and errors come up along the way, everybody's even happier. But remember, we said also frauds and errors are no longer the primary objective, they are the secondary objective. And a lot of people, including stakeholders, are still a little wary about that. How the heck did the auditors come up with that little thing about frauds and errors are not primary anymore? Remember, we said in our history discussion of audits that once upon a time, frauds and errors were the primary function. That's what auditors came to find, fraud and errors, fix them, and fix the people who committed them. But now in a modern auditing society, frauds and errors are still important, but they are secondary. And as a result, we sometimes have more frauds and errors. All right. So now we are into our discussion of internal control. And we are told that internal controls is a very important part of the auditing process. We are also told that internal controls refer to many checks that are carried out within the business to ensure that it's running efficiently and is working towards the goals of management. We're also told that internal controls is an important tool for management to use, because management, based on the results of those audits, will make certain decisions or should make certain decisions with regards to correcting any errors and prosecuting and dealing with any fraudulent situations that might come up. And of course, let us not forget, if the auditors report, internal or external, when I say auditors, I am talking about internal and external, depending on what side of the fence you're on. But when they report to management, they're kind of like the eyes and ears of management, especially those management people who are interested in good corporate governance and proper management. Any management team that we find fighting with auditors in any way, usually that's not a good sign. When they keep getting into the face of auditors, challenging them. I'm not saying they can't challenge them, but if it seems like they challenge them too much, that might get auditors a little suspicious, like, why is this guy staying in our face? Maybe we need to look even closer. Okay, so again, even with our own personal behavior, when audits are being done, we have to behave a certain way. Otherwise, we might make auditors suspicious. And sometimes some people, even when they behave normal, quote unquote, they still look suspicious because they just have a suspicious face, perhaps. All right. So we're going to be talking about what is the internal control and how does it work and how does it help auditors. Essentially, when we're talking about internal controls, we're talking about a system that cross-checks itself. Okay? A system that has all kinds of supervision protocols in place. And a system that is carried out by staff, if it's internal, and external auditors, if we're talking about an independent auditor. Either way, it's all about trying to make sure that the processes are working according to policy. Now, whether we like it or not, the computer age and the age of business has become a very significant part of the world's activity. As a result, business practices are often much more complex than we think they are. And of course, the more complex things become, the harder they are to control. And so now, as the company gets bigger and bigger, it has to be looking for better ways to control its processes. Okay? And that's why the issue of internal controls has now taken front seat. It's always been out there, but white collar crime scenes have gone up by leaps and bounds, not that they are new. Okay? And so every day companies are looking for ways to improve, or should be looking for ways to improve their internal controls, for sure. Now, we know that the bigger an organization is, the harder it is to get not only information, but correct information. By the time it gets to the source who's waiting for the information, it has all kinds of different twists to it. Anybody ever played that game where you make a long line and then at the end of one line, we tell somebody something in the air, and then when we're done, get down to the end of the other line, we say to that person, what did you hear? And most times it's not what the original message was. You guys ever played that?
Yes, I've done that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay. And that's how messages tend to be in real life as well, which is why sometimes a lot of things get messed up, which is why it's an important when you're dealing with important stuff. You have to not only get the message, hear what is being said, but also be in a position to verify. And that's really the auditor's job. Verification, checking stuff to make sure that what you say is. Because sometimes people put a lot of stuff on paper, but they're not doing it. They don't have anything in place. They just write that it's in place, knowing full well that no such thing exists. Now, coming down to the end of your first paragraph, you'll see that there's an important little note that says, I think it's the last sentence of the sentence before the last 4 lines up. Internal controls are used to ensure the accuracy of operation. How about that? To increase the operational efficiency of the business, to safeguard its assets, and to ensure the orderly conduct of business. So, if at any point in the future you are confronted with the question, what are internal controls? It should be a little easier for you to answer that question now. It's really like a thread that holds the organization together, whether it's internal or external. Remember, we touched on the fact also last time that it's possible when management wants operations to be checked on a regular basis, they implement an internal audit department. When they want their financial statements and records and reports to be checked for accuracy and completeness, then they would pretty much bring in the external auditor, who we already discussed is much more independent than the internal auditor. But notwithstanding that, the internal auditor, like the compliance officer, is still expected to do their jobs and do it completely, even if it means you're going to be threatened to be fired, which happens a lot, unfortunately. All right. So that's a classic introduction to the nature of internal controls, how it works within the business society, how everybody's fighting to get some kind of internal control system in place because, hey, you will never be cleared for proper day-to-day operations if those internal controls are not working properly, right? And we'll see some examples later on. One of the more simple and straightforward examples have to do with cash. One person should not be doing all the cash transactions. Never. Sooner or later, except for God's grace, they're going to get crafty. Not everybody, just too many. They're going to get crafty and try to get their hands on the money. Okay? Right.
Oh, right, yeah, I see.
I have a question, Mr. Wilson.
Definitely.
I was supposed to ask from a few classes ago. Okay, you know, they talk about
Said she must be going on prayer meeting already.
having managers as being they talk about managers having you know doing fraud as well, right?
Mhm.
But you have a lot of companies that don't even audit managers, they audit staff. So I just wanted to know, is that a reason for that?
You know, that is such a valid question. It's a wild and crazy question. There are some firms that afford to actually do that. And here's the problem with that. answer your question.
This all came in.
There should be no such thing as auditing just the other staff and not the management staff. There should be no such thing. That is an absolute no-no, and there's no way.
The guy and no darky stop.
Somebody's mic is open.
One to go on to Jimmy's, come up with one fork or the chocolate. Then she had to come up and gone, so she had to go to Brian's house and come with the chocolate.
Somebody's mic is open.
Before I walk with their toilet. As soon as you know all the teachers and the people that you use and yes, I think we're gonna finish it.
I wonder whose mic that is.
So as soon as we're finished. He said, but what time is it? It's just good, fine. So that's why I said, let me call and tell you. I said, "You see, I'm so busy."
Whose mic is open?
I said, but you need to come down here and sit right here. Why, you know? So she said, okay, so I could.
I think it's Monique.
It's Monique,
Monique,
Some more details about course, kind of stuff and then.
but I don't think she is looking at the screen.
was it Monique?
All work yesterday. She got to come.
Sorry.
Monique, was it you who asked the question, Monique?
No, that's a Dira.
Oh, no.
Yeah, okay. Great, Monique is turning it off. Now, Indira, to answer your question, there should be no such thing as managers, for example, not being part of the audit process. And so if you see that happening anywhere, you can take your newfound knowledge, audit information, and challenge it if you have the nerve to do it. But no, to answer your question, that should not happen. Everybody should be subject to the audit process. Everybody, whether it's internal or external. Now, in many companies, especially with internal auditors, when it's time for them to check managers and maybe even question the board, God forbid, they get a little cranky, like, why are you checking us? We're the gods here. You don't need to be checked. Go and check the other lowly subjects. We don't teach. Maybe you check one of them kind of attitude. That should not be the case. When internal and external auditors are coming in to carry out their audit checks and processes and techniques and whatever, all these sampling, all the stuff we discuss about making an audit work, everybody's required to be inquired into, and everybody's expected to be cooperative, no matter what the level is in the organization. But you know, some folks go, Indira, they have this, you don't know who I am kind of attitude. Essentially, that should not apply to any auditor. Okay? And as a matter of fact, any senior people who try to get away with that, then immediately they become suspect. Like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to suggest that you're exempt from this audit? Who are you
Right.
trying to intimidate?
Understandable.
Say it again?
No, I say understandable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nobody's exempt. Everybody is subject to it. But that doesn't mean, as usual, somebody at the senior management level, especially because senior management people in many organizations who are responsible for being an example, sometimes they are worse than everybody else in the firm. Sometimes they're the biggest thieves than anybody else in the firm. Sometimes they're the biggest violators of their very own policies and procedures that they swear to uphold and to ensure every living soul in that organization does the same. It's a strange kind of irony. Okay? So hopefully that answers your question. It should not happen. And if you see it happening somewhere, that's not good. Okay? For sure. All right. So let's see. Letitia, did you read last week?
No, not last week.
Oh, you said that like you did read before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Let me throw out a trick question then. Who was not read at all yet?
Cameron, what you doing?
Huh? Who was not read at all yet?
Get yourself back in the room, please.
We're conducting an internal audit.
Go back in the room. Go ahead, go in the room.
Right.
Cameron, go in the room, please. If you stay out here, you have to behave.
Brian. Brian,
Yeah,
how old is Cameron?
3.
3? He wanted to be 8? You need to tie him up and gag him. Or let somebody put him in front of SpongeBob or something. That stuff's not going to work. Hell
Yeah.
no. Uh, okay. Who has not read yet so far? Everybody's read? Let's see if we're going to get on truthful disclosure for part of this audit. So far, it's quiet. That quiet makes auditors suspicious. Is there anybody in this class who's not read yet?
I believe we've all read, so looks like.
Okay,
it's
we've
looking
all
back.
read. So back to the beginning again.
Okay.
Okay. She solved the problem. So, well, you know what? No answer. I think we've all read. Let's begin again. All right. Done it. So we go back. Well, let's start at the bottom this time. Last time I think we started with the teacher at the top. This time we'll start with Monique at the bottom. Monique, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Monique. Well, why don't you pick up the discussion on the definition of internal control.
Okay, definition of internal control. The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants has defined internal control as the plan of management and all the coordinate methods and measures adopted within a business to safeguard its assets, check the accuracy and the reliability of its accounting data, promote operational efficiency, and encourage adherence to prescribed managerial policies. A system of internal control extends beyond those matters which relate directly to the functions of the accounting and financial departments. The Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales defines internal control as internal control means not only the internal check or internal audit, but the whole system of control, financial and otherwise, established by management in order to carry on the business of the company in an orderly manner, safeguard its assets, and secure as far as possible accuracy and reliability of its records.
Okay, keep going.
Objectives of internal control: to minimize, if not eliminate, wastage and inefficiencies in business operations and to safeguard the assets of the business. To ensure a high degree of accuracy and reliability of accounting data and promote operational efficiency. To measure how well management policies are being implemented. To evaluate the efficiency of performances in all aspects of business activities and to highlight the weaknesses. Forms of internal control. Various forms of internal control help in ensuring correct and reliable records of transactions and operational efficiencies. The following are some of the key controls. Accounting controls. Accounting controls ensure correct and reliable records of transactions in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. Such controls are primarily the plan of the organization. They represent the procedures and records that are concerned with and directly related to the safeguarding of assets and liabilities in the financial records. Accounting financial controls include budgetary controls, standard cost control, bank reconciliation, internal checks, and internal auditing. Accounting controls deal with the process of recording all transactions, safeguarding the assets, and adherence to prescribed managerial policies. Administrative controls. The scope of this control is very wide and should also include accounting controls. Such controls are concerned mainly with operational efficiencies. In short, they may include anything from organizational procedures, record keeping, distribution of authority, and the decision-making process. They also include controls such as time and motion studies, quality control through inspection, statistical analysis, and performance evaluation. An auditor should make a careful review of auditing and administrative controls as they have a direct bearing on the reliability of the financial statements. His primary concern is with the accounting controls.
Thank you very much, Monique. Excellent, excellent. So if we back up a little bit to where she first started, she jumped off with what is the definition of internal control. I think you probably figured out yourself that that is very likely to be a question on your final examination, obviously. The definition is absolutely crucial to the entire process and the discussion. But basically, what are some of the key points, anyone, that comes up on the definition of internal control? What are we talking about when we're talking about internal control? What is it designed to do? And that very first paragraph that she read says internal controls are designed to do a couple of important things in the firm. What are they?
Plan to
Read the
safeguard
first
Well,
paragraph.
assets.
Safeguard its assets, yes.
Accuracy check, reliability of
Accuracy,
data,
yeah,
accounting data,
yeah,
looking at operational efficiency and managerial policies, adherence to managerial policies.
indeed. So basically, looking at the whole day-to-day operation to make sure that things are working the way they should. We all know how human nature works. Sometimes we try to get away with stuff with people watching. Imagine in plain sight. Imagine if nobody was checking. What in the world would go on? Look at what goes on with people checking. Imagine if there was no internal control in place. Assets would be stolen and destroyed. The accounting would not be reliable because they put anything into the accounting records, and since nobody's checking, nobody will be the wiser. Efficiency will go down the drain, so we will be wasting the resources and the materials of the company, costing it tons and tons of money every year, and so on. So we see then that the internal control function is a check and balance system, no doubt about it. Okay, and we can begin to feel, no doubt already, what would happen if we didn't have that. Okay? The Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, it's in UK, similar to the American CPA, by the way, in the United States, and the Canadian CA in Canada. They're all very much the same. They had something to say about the definition of internal controls and internal audits, but basically, um, it's really designed to control the financial system, to control the resources, and to control the accounting processes of every single firm. Big time situation. The firms that do this better suffer less losses. The firms that don't do this so well, do this meaning internal control systems, they tend to suffer greater losses in one form or another. And as you can see, the objectives of the internal control system is very clear. We didn't make any bones out of it. The answers are brief and to the point. It, if not eliminate waste, to minimize it. If not to eliminate inefficiencies, to minimize it. All of these things save the company money. Food stores estimate that millions and millions of dollars are lost every year from pillaging, where employees, not customers of the food store, employees run off with food stuff every week. They don't feel it because they're running off with a couple bags or boxes, but in aggregate, if you have a bunch of employees across the board running off with stuff every day, and you multiply all that by 12 months for food stores, it turns out to be millions of dollars in aggregate. Okay? And so without them, without the internal controls that they have in food stores and such places, they know that they're going to suffer significant losses. As a matter of fact, even with the controls in place, people still find a way around them. But at least the hope is that you can minimize that to the greatest possible extent, as opposed to if you did not have them in place. Accuracy and reliability of accounting records and data, absolutely crucial. If we cannot rely on the accounting data, then we have a problem, Houston. And we need a system to help us to be comfortable. And that is what the audit process is all about. Which is why when we run into corrupt auditors, we feel the same way we feel about corrupt police. Because they have one thing in common. We trust them. Is that correct, class? Does anybody in this class trust the police? Sorry, it's not a trick question.
I guess that's a no.
Yes, I do.
Oh. I was about to say.
Yeah, but you know, we like to copy stuff, so since the Americans say they hate the police, we have some Bahamians who hate the police too, they say. They are not sure why, but, or maybe they have their reasons, they think. But yeah, the auditor and the police have something in common, we trust them. Imagine if you cannot trust a police class. They have the power to do all kinds of things. Whenever they're corrupt, everything gets really, really messy. Okay? They have the power to stop you anywhere. And if they're corrupt, dog eat your lunch. Most people don't have the power to do it. They try to stop you, especially late at night, you run them over. Because you're not stopping. But if the police puts up his hand or says, pull over, you're like, oh my God, the police. And so we do it because we trust them. Okay? And so we should have the same trust in our auditors, that they're going to do the right thing, that they're not going to get all messed up by getting management to cause them to change their findings and all this crazy stuff. Look the other way. Look the other way. Here's another bag of money. Whatever it is that people use to persuade people. All right, so reliability and accuracy are key. Okay. Putting policies and procedures in place and writing to indicate exactly what needs to be done. Very important to the process. Okay. And again, efficiency comes up again. Because efficiency is all about saving money, getting more done with less. That way, you increase profitability and everybody is happy generally. Now, please also be aware that the internal control process has two parts connected to it. As she said, we have the accounting side and we have the administrative side. The accounting side deals primarily with the accuracy and reliability of accounting records, and the administrative control pretty much deals with everything else. Anything else that needs to fix that is not an accounting issue falls under administrative control, whatever it is, including the amount of money you give. Quick question. Money given to the Pope, is that an accounting issue or an administrative issue? The company loves the Pope, so every year they give the Pope $300,000.
Accounting issue.
Accounting issue?
I would say anything dealing with money is accounting.
Okay, accounting issue is one position. Any other perspectives? Well, it's definitely an accounting issue, but by extension, it could easily become an administrative issue depending on what the results are from that little exchange. All right, so you do need to know the difference between accounting controls and administrative controls. They're not difficult. One deals with accounting records and information accuracy and reliability. The other one deals with every other possible type of problem the company might be able to exist. And that's pretty much how we operate within that environment, because that's the best that we have at the moment. Okay? And for all intents and purposes, it works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. All right, so now the question comes, how is it then that the internal auditor or the auditor in general gets tied up with internal control issues? And you will see very quickly how that happens to be and why it is important that internal controls and the auditor, in or out, internal or external, marry in their objective. Because without those proper controls in place, sooner or later something is going to fall apart, and then somebody is going to be called up on the red carpet. Okay? All right, so let's see what the position is between the auditor and the internal control process. This is just me hunting around the names. Shaniqua.
Yes.
Okay, internal control. By the way, just a point for before you begin, Shaniqua. Monique, are you still there? Monique, are you still there?
I'm there.
Okay. I don't know if I've said it before previously, but one of the things that is intriguing, you guys can tell me if you would agree with me or not. One of the things that is intriguing about Monique when she's reading, it's like Monique reads at 90 miles per hour, but here's what is fascinating. She reads at 90 miles an hour. And when I say 90 miles an hour, I'm just, that's an exaggerated speed. But she reads at 90 miles an hour, yet her reading is one, clear. You can understand everything she's saying. And two, she doesn't get mixed up and tumble all over herself. How do you do that, Monique?
I don't know.
You don't know exactly. I know you don't know. You just know that's the way it is.
I'm not a great public speaker, so put me on the spot, I guess. When I'm nervous, I read quickly.
Well, it doesn't matter. What is important is one, that whatever you're reading, everybody understands it. And two, you don't get all confuddled up doing it. You do it very naturally. So it's amazing the differences. That's really the point in how we present. And usually people who don't like public speaking tend to be people who can speak well in public. If you just drag them out money, screaming and shouting.
Okay.
Okay, well done, well done. Okay, Shaniqua, you have the floor.
Okay.
Shaniqua, like, okay, what the hell? Okay, then let it rip.
Internal control and the auditor.
Hmm?
That's where I'm starting at.
Yeah, right there.
Okay. The position of the auditor regarding internal control has been outlined in the Statement of Auditing Practices, which says the duty of safeguarding the assets of a company is primarily that of management, and the auditor is entitled to rely upon the safeguard and internal controls instituted by the management, although he will take into account the deficiencies he may note therein while drafting his audit program. It clearly means that an auditor is concerned only with the evaluation of internal control to know its strength and weaknesses. In cases where he finds that the internal control system is inadequate, he should then plan to carry out a detailed examination of those areas where the system is weak. It is therefore necessary for the auditor to acquaint himself fully with the internal control in place and their actual operation. It will help him in the formulation of his audit program. He should bring the shortcomings of the internal control system to the management's attention.
So before she goes on, notice one of the things that auditors tend to do when they come into your company is to find out, first of all, if there's an internal auditor, if there's an internal audit department, and if the answer is yes, they want to see the internal audit reports, because they want to see what kind of work is going on internally from the internal audit department. And this report will help the external auditor to determine, okay, do I need to go in more detail than this, or the internal audit people have done a fantastic job. I could bypass these things and move into some other critical areas. Similarly, though, if the external auditor is not happy with the nature of the internal audit process, first of all, they will tell management that they're not happy about it and why. And secondly, they will encourage management to improve the internal audit function. Okay? And that could be anything from inadequate or inappropriate report writing to something as simple as the frequency of audits that are conducted in a particular area. Okay? All right, keep going, Shaniqua.
Okay. Requisites of a good internal control system. The following are the essential requisites of a good internal control system. 1, a well-developed Organizational plan with proper delegation of functional responsibility should be in place. No internal control system can be effective without such plan. 2, a system of authorization and record keeping should be developed with a view to providing proper control over assets, liabilities, revenue, and expenses of the organization. It should be developed in such a way as to ensure that A, assets are under proper custody and they are not improperly used. B, expenditures incurred get proper authorization. And C, revenues received are duly accounted for. 3, a system of healthy practices and traditions should be developed with a view to discharging the duties and functions of the various departments of the organization in an orderly and ethical manner.
Mm.
4, since internal control systems are to be exercised by the personnel employed by the organization, they should be a team of people with sound character and integrity who are properly trained and capable of discharging their responsibilities. 5, constant managerial supervision and periodical reviews of the system should be introduced with a view to making the system more efficient and effective.
Okay, stick a pin one more time, Shaniqua. Let's go back again to some of the things she said, the prerequisites or requisites. A couple of key issues for the internal control system within any organization. If these things do not exist, then you're gonna have a problem. Some of you, no doubt, have seen these things occurring around you in the world of work, I hope. It may not be as obvious or direct as it's stated here, but if you look at what you're doing, you could easily find one of these requisites and say, that applies to this and that applies to that. And that's the whole idea. Now you have names and processes to apply to many of the things you do at your workplace and you actually see. Okay? Notice we are told that, like everything else, internal control systems require a plan. Without a well-executed plan, the system of internal controls, like anything else, will not work. Okay? Notice some of the other things she mentioned in number 2, that the system requires proper authorization. In other words, one person authorizing is not enough. 7 people authorizing is too much. All right, you're gonna have on the one hand room for somebody to hanky pank if it's only one signature. If you have 7 signature, confusion and all kinds of other collusion and everything else you can imagine. Okay, so authorizations are crucial. Record keeping is crucial. Anybody in this classroom ever was responsible for record keeping, past or present? Record keeping. No?
Yes, in some form,
Yeah,
filing.
yeah. You have to do some filing for someone, for yourself,
Mhm.
the organization, no doubt. Now, some people treat filing very shabbily. They just throw stuff anywhere, whatever bucket goes. They don't label anything. If you can't find it next month, too bad, whatever the case might be. And imagine if record keeping is poor and the auditor, internal, external auditor comes in and says, I'd like to see this, this, and this. You're like, well, it's around here somewhere. We just don't know where it is. That's not good.
No.
Things like that make auditors suspicious. It upsets them, and they're gonna start taking much more time to look more closely at your operation when you do stuff like that. Okay, for sure. So authorizations are crucial. Healthy practices are encouraged. See, healthy practices. Everybody needs to be involved in the internal or external audit process. The more people know, the more they can equip themselves and the more conscious they will be. Some organizations have this dastardly thing that if you're not the financial controller, the CFO, or some senior people in the firm, that many junior people do not require this kind of what they call quote unquote high level training. The truth of the matter is there's a lot of stuff a person's down the line may not remember, but there's a lot of stuff they're responsible for, whether they remember it or not. And so essentially, It'll do organizations well to send people down the line, not just senior management and the others for certain courses, but the key ones. Okay, to send information down the line, make sure they are aware of what needs to be done. Because remember, they are your first line of defense. And if your front line is weakened, sooner or later you will be defeated in your efforts in one form or another. Notice the word ethical came up somewhere. That's interesting. Ethical came up somewhere. Why do we need to be ethical? Because ethical is really all about doing the right thing. Operational, doing things right. Ethical, doing the right thing. Very different things. And many professionals, senior and junior alike, forget that particular connotation. Okay. And yet they continue to engage in all kinds of unhealthy behavior. And so this internal control function, and if you haven't gotten it yet from all these requisites and definitions, etc., are really designed to keep everybody honest, to keep the organization efficient, to safeguard the assets so that people don't run off, waste and destroy company assets, and so that ultimately the whole process, if left unattended, will affect the organization's reputation. And we all know when reputation gets lost, it's hard to get it back, okay? If not impossible sometimes. All right, keep going, Shaniqua.
The internal audit. Internal audit is described as the verification of the operations within the business by specially assigned staff. It is an important management tool to evaluate the correctness of records on a continuous basis in an organization. The term internal audit has been defined as an independent appraisal of activity within an organization to keep management informed of operations. It is a managerial control which functions by measuring and evaluating the effectiveness of controls. According to Howard F. Stelzler, internal auditing is an independent appraisal activity within an organization for the review of operations as a service to management. The overall objective of internal auditing, therefore, is to assist management and with the effective discharge of their responsibilities by furnishing them with objective analysis, appraisals, recommendations, and pertinent disclosures concerning the activities reviewed. In short, internal audit assures management that the system of internal checks, other types of controls are effective in design and operation. The internal audit of the accounts department, for example, is a thorough examination of the accounting transactions to ensure that the transactions are properly recorded, the accounts are properly maintained, there is no possibility for manipulation of accounts or misappropriation of the property of the business.
Thank you very much, Shaniqua. So you can see, suddenly we go from the morality of it all and the inefficiencies and the safeguarding of assets, right down, drill all the way down to the financial statements. Okay, all the way down to accounting transactions. Remember, accounting transactions are the very first line of defense. A lot of people still don't understand it. We see a set of financial statements being prepared at the end of the year, the income statement, the balance sheet, and then we say like, oh yeah, great. Yes, everything is fine. Well, it's not necessarily fine. Okay, it's like a battered wife or a battered husband. They look fine on the outside, but inside they're devastated. And some organizations look that very same way. Their financial records look great on the outside, except when the auditors start looking on the inside at the nitty-gritty, they discover all kinds of accounting and administrative mumbo jumbo. Anything from an incessant amount of errors to fraud and to misappropriations. Now, let me ask you guys a question. in terms of an internal audit or external audit process, why is it important for them to make sure that transactions are quote unquote properly recorded? Why is that so important? After all, it's just recording a bunch of stinky transactions in the ledger. But why is that so crucial?
Because the
You-
recording of the transactions will affect the outcome of the balance sheet or
No.
financial statements.
No question about it. How,
But
yeah, go ahead.
whether they were, whether any form of a misappropriation was done, or the actual transactions were recorded properly.
Yeah, definitely. She's kind of putting all the pieces out there, but every single piece is connected. Absolutely. These transactions, remember, anybody in this class ever did accounting at all?
I did.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, that's a start. For those of you who've never done accounting, somewhere in your professional life, you need to go and do at least accounting 1 and 2. Okay? Because accounting techniques and concepts are so useful way outside of just the accounting process itself. And you don't have to say, I don't want to be a CPA to benefit from accounting principles and practices by no stretch of the imagination. They do that crap because they're looking at high level tax issues and audits and all that stuff. But that doesn't mean that the average person working in just about any profession in the world cannot benefit from 1 or 2 substantive accounting classes. And so, if you haven't done so, or you haven't done so lately, give it some thought. Come summer, come fall, I wouldn't say steal the money, but find your way in an accounting class. You will not regret it. Okay? Yeah, it'll work you a little bit, but nothing good comes easy. At the end of the day, when you're done successfully with it, you'll be happy that you did. Okay? So these transactions really represent what is happening all day, every day within the firm. And the job of the accounting staff is to make sure that every single transaction that occurs goes into the accounting system. Which means if somebody throws a piece of paper away, that doesn't go in. If somebody posts something incorrectly in the system, it throws off the accuracy of the information that is produced at the end of the year. If transactions are omitted, meaning never recorded as if they never happened, then it means that certain things like sales and expenses, etc., will be understated, incorrect. And if verification takes place, you discover that somebody didn't really know what they were doing, or they did it on purpose. Okay? So these transactions are crucial. That's why any internal control system will set up an accounting department or have a person dealing with accounting issues to make sure that they have the basic knowledge of bookkeeping and accounting, and that when transactions come in, they can actually process them correctly. Okay? And many firms struggle internally with, hey, suppose somebody just doesn't bring it. Well, if it doesn't show up somewhere else, then dog eat everybody's lunch, which is why we continue to say that the auditor cannot be expected to find everything in too many transactions, that we rely a great deal on the internal audit function. Even them will not find everything. But at the end of the day, with people looking, it makes it more difficult, not impossible, more difficult for persons to mess with the company's assets, etc. So beware of those transactions. They are not to be just recorded, but rather to be properly recorded. Okay? Notice the second point you made, the accounts are to be properly maintained. preferably in an electronic state, but you can do it manually as well, as long as you maintain them properly. And what is maintenance? Making sure that all the information that goes in is true and fair, etc. And also making sure that no errors, deliberate or otherwise, find their way to the accounting records. So sometimes, depending on the amount of money involved, it could be devastating. And the bigger the companies are, doesn't mean that they'll fall away from it necessarily, but it happens. Certainly the smaller companies, where every dime counts, they have to be very vigilant about the transactions, how they're recorded, and how their accounting systems are maintained. A lot of small business don't even have an accounting system of any kind. And oftentimes when you tell them they should get one, put it in place, they're like, I don't really need one. I have my bank statement. I can see how much money I'm depositing and how much money I'm taking out, and they think that's all to it. But I think you guys have discovered already that that is not all to it. And notice the other reason for the internal audit, the internal checks, internal control is the third one. To ensure that there is no possibility, well, that's a little intense, but they're making the point that there's no possibility for manipulating any of the accounts. We saw that earlier, or misappropriating any of them. Point, and the reason why those words are there is because everywhere, somewhere in the world, somebody's trying to pull it off. Manipulation, misappropriation, or both. Imagine that. Turn your back for 1 minute, crap happens. Does anybody shop at Book World? No?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes we shop at Book World. Have you noticed that the owners of Book World, they always have one or two of their representatives standing around the cash register? Anybody ever notice that?
Yes, always.
Yeah, always.
Mhm.
They don't trust the ladies that are cashing? Is that it? Or they just like to smell the money? Which one?
I think it's a control thing more so than trust. But there may be a bit of distrust in there. The fact that they find the need to stand around
Yeah,
all the
Shanique,
time.
yeah, maybe there's just an inherent mistrust in the whole culture,
Mhm.
okay? In general in the culture, and then specifically, like, wait a minute, we live among these people and we provide goods and services, etc. But according to the record, according to what somebody said, according to some historical accounts and so on, they're like, okay. But the point is, they're there for a primary reason, and that is control. See, whatever the other details are, the primary reason is control. Because if a firm is to run efficiently and on all cylinders, it has to always be considering the issue of how to control the situation. If you're going to run a household effectively, you can't have children and spouses out of control. That's not going to work. Same problem as the firm. You have to have controls in place. Children go to bed at 9, whatever, say like that. Say, oh, 9 is too early. Can I wait until 11? The answer is no. The policy in this house says children go to bed at 9 so they can get adequate sleep. Okay? That's how controls work. There'll be 2 signatures authorizing every single transaction in this organization. And for anything over 1 million, 3 signatures. All of these are control measures to make sure. And anybody who's seeking to violate them, internal auditors should pick it up. Some staff member who's simply just watching it happen, remember, has a responsibility to report. Imagine that. Okay? This is very serious business, actually, when you think about it, for sure. All right, Shaniqua, way to go. Thank you very much. Let's see who's on top of Shaniqua. Indira, it's you again, in the middle. Are you there? Indira, are you there? Looks like Indira got knocked out of the system. Lights went off. Be easy. Who knows? All right, we'll come back to Indira. Something is going on. Who's on top of Indira? Jason, are you there? Siobhan,
I was wondering who was Jason.
I'm glad you didn't answer. One of the reasons why, let me show you how interesting life is, Siobhan. That's probably one of the reasons why we have a name, doesn't it? Is a name a control measure?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Suppose everybody's name was Boy. Imagine that. When you say boy, what happens? Everybody shows up. So even in a name, it's a control measure so that you can call specifically for the person that you want without having the entire herd come in your direction. Imagine that. Very interesting example of a very relevant issue that we're discussing. Okay, Siobhan, why don't you pick it up for us in modern times? That's now, I guess.
Okay. In modern times, an internal auditor carries a new task. The traditional function of checking the arithmetical correctness of the accounts with the help of vouchers and documents and the verification of a few items such as stock, cash, and fixed assets are no longer sufficient. The duty of the internal auditor now is to chart the procedure, examine the efficiency, and work on programs to improve the assessment of the effectiveness of controls. He is expected to plan and arrange his tasks for effective functioning, set clear objectives of his own section, phases his objectives, gain the confidence of the management, and demonstrate the value of his functions by his performance. The internal audit is carried out generally in the same manner as is followed for a professional audit. However, it varies in the form of enterprise to enterprise, according to its size and specific needs. In large organizations, the internal audit function is carried out by the salaried staff who are qualified to conduct professional audits. The internal auditor has to ensure that there is no waste or loss in the organization. He has to follow the provisions of the law, standard auditing practices, and procedure prescribed for professional auditors and by professional bodies controlling the audit system in the country. At the same time, the internal auditor must be aware of the policies and programs of the enterprise where he is employed. He should be professionally competent to carry out a detailed examination of the working of the business. Equipped with professional expertise and knowledge of the business, he will be in a better position to make the internal audit system more effective. Objectives of internal audit. The main objectives of internal audit are as follows: to verify the correctness and the authenticity of the financial records and statistical records presented to the management, to ensure that the standard accounting practices are strictly followed in the organization, to facilitate the early detection of errors and frauds, to ensure that all the transactions have been carried out under proper authority and by persons authorized for the same in the business, to review the system of internal controls from time to time, to advise management on improvements that can be implemented, to verify that the liabilities have been incurred by the organization for legitimate activities. The efficiency of the internal audit depends on the efficiency of the staff employed for the purpose. The internal audit can only be effective if the internal auditor is given wide authority to investigate transactions only from financial angles, but also from other organizational angles. I assume that meant to say not only.
Yes.
The internal auditor should report directly to top management. He must operate independently he must operate independently of the accounting and other staff.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Siobhan. So let's back up on some of that stuff he said, so we don't miss how serious the job itself is. I'll go as far back as where he said, uh, uh, that, hey, the internal audit function is not to be discounted, because some, believe it or not, some persons who work in firms, because of the disrespect of the internal audit function by senior management, lower level staff do not take the internal audit function as seriously as they should. That is unbelievable, that could happen, but in some organizations, it actually does happen. Okay? There is a disdain and a disrespect for the internal audit function. And everybody only starts jumping around when the external auditors come in. Part of the reason for this is, so oftentimes senior management does not make people aware of the seriousness of the internal audit function, and that management will support the auditors to the very end, whatever issues they encounter. And so once people understand that, once, like everything else, there's management support, then things have a tendency to work far more completely than if there's no management report going on. Okay? So having said that, why do we conduct these internal audits at all? Says Javon. Well, he mentioned a couple of key points. I suspect this list is not exhaustive, but it does touch the hardcore issues. For example, the audit internally is to verify the correctness, no new word for us, and authenticity. What does that mean, anyone? Authenticity of the financial records. What does that mean?
The genuineness of it.
Yeah, genuineness meaning, what's
No
another word?
cases of fraud, maybe?
Yeah, well, certainly to make
Oh,
sure that there's no fraud. Absolutely, absolutely. Authentic means that everything that is there should be there, that nobody added anything that shouldn't be there, and nobody subtracted anything out of it that shouldn't have been subtracted. Okay, and so authentic. It's like an authentic piece of jewelry. Is this real gold or not? So you take it to a test, to have it tested to see whether it's authentic. Is this a real internal audit department or not? All right. But again, like I said, a lot of internal audit departments don't get the respect because they don't work, they don't set up their audit programs and operations to garner the respect from staff. A lot of internal auditors have this tendency to blend with the staff, go to lunch with them, crack jokes when things are slow. Now, I'm not saying that internal auditors should not be sociable, but like the external auditor, if you don't draw the line somewhere, then the people in your organization will not take your job very seriously. And that is unfortunate, but it happens many, many times. Okay? So authenticity of the financial records. Remember we said, if they're not genuine or authentic, then the final financial statements are going to be a mess, and there's nothing much we can do about it, except if possible, to go back and correct it. It's a whole different ball game. To ensure that the standard accounting practices, see, generally accepted accounting principles, not your own personal thing. That's something you learn in grade 6 about cash entries and so on. Okay? It's a lot more than that. But the key is to make sure that whatever you're practicing in accounting for your firm, that it is acceptable and suitable. That's the key. Okay? Of course, the third one is no secret to us. To facilitate the detection of errors and frauds, by all means, that is a big part of the internal auditor's job, and to expose anybody who's acting outside of the policy's correctness, for sure. All right. What else did he say? Checking from time to time. Internal audits should be recurrent, quarterly, however frequently the internal auditor thinks it should be. Because remember, the more you're checking people, the more likely you are to discover errors, to discover frauds, or worse. So we have to be very careful. All right. And then the word efficiency comes up again, that the internal audit can only be effective if the internal auditor is given, see, wide authority to investigate transactions. And the reason that is there, because a lot of companies appoint internal auditors just like they do compliance officers, only because the law requires it to be so. And treat the internal auditors sometimes with disdain and disrespect, sometimes even in front of the employees themselves. Cannot do that, Mr. CEO and others. Okay? Otherwise, employees will not take the process seriously, nor will some of the auditors for that matter, because they'll be too pissed off by how you treated them. Okay? So what if they teeth the money, they don't teeth it, I'll just look the other way. Willful blindness. A lot of dynamics going on. Okay, for sure. All right, thank you, Javon. Let's see. Brian, are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Doggone it. So you didn't hear me volunteer, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get up before you read, do a good stretch and jump right on to the internal versus statutory audit. And get it over with.
Oh, okay. Internal audit. versus
Brian,
statu- Hey,
you sound like you're doing exactly what you should be doing. Have one foot up on top of the other one with your hand. It's just the perfect way to get an education. Is it not?
yeah, it
By
is.
all means. All right, let's
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Internal audit versus statutory audit. Both the internal auditor and the statutory auditor have a common interest as far as verifying the authenticity of the accounts are concerned. The soundness of the internal auditor relieves the statutory auditor from detailed checking.
By the way, before he goes on, let's get something cleared up. Who's a statutory auditor? And what is a statutory audit?
Required by law.
Yeah, a statutory audit is required by law, such as every financial institution in the Bahamas has to be, in particular banks, insurance companies, credit unions, they have to be audited once a year by law. You don't have a choice. Like, I don't feel like having any audit done this year. Save us money. You don't have a choice. If you don't do it, you'll be in violation and you'll be hit with some administrative fines until you get it done. In case you didn't know. And so the statutory audit is required by law, and clearly the statutory auditor works for the statutory audit firm that is required by law. All right, keep going.
The internal auditor reviews the operations and performs such functions as evaluation, compliance, verification, and ensures that policies, procedures, rules, and other types of controls of the business are carried out efficiently. He is helpful to the statutory auditor in matters pertaining to the examination of books of accounting. Generally, the statutory auditor accepts some of the detailed checking made by the internal auditor. However, the area of cooperation between the internal auditor and the statutory auditor is somewhat limited, as the statutory auditor has a responsibility under law to various authorities, while the internal auditor is responsible only to the management. Statutory auditor has to carry out his duties in accordance with standard accounting and auditing practices and the provisions of law which govern the organization. Before accepting the checking of accounts and other documents carried out by the internal auditor, the statutory auditor must undertake such checks that are necessary to find out the effectiveness of internal audit. Both internal auditor and statutory auditor carry out the examination of records and documents and make physical and other verifications. Despite these similarities, there are differences in the status, responsibilities, approach, and scope of work of the internal auditor and statutory auditor.
I guess you probably figured out by now, after having gone this past and having completed the midterm exam, that these similarities and differences between the internal and external auditor is always a possibility for something like that to show up in a test, because it is so important to know these differences. Okay, that might be a hint. Keep going.
Differences between internal audit and statutory audit. Internal audit. 1. Internal audit is the agreement within the organization to verify on a continuous basis the correctness and truthfulness of the transaction by staff. Statutory audit is the examination of the books of accounts of the business by an external auditor and to report that the profit and loss account and balance sheet are drawn according to provisions of law, and the financial statements are revealed, and the financial statements reveal the true and fair view of the results of operation and financial state of affairs of the business. So, internal audit is not compulsory. Statutory audit is compulsory in case of business houses incorporated under the Companies Act and other acts. 3. Internal audit is carried out by the staff appointed by the business enterprise. It is not necessarily that the internal audit staff should possess the qualifications prescribed for professional audits. The rights, duties, responsibilities, and liabilities of auditors are governed by the provisions of law. 4. Being an employee of the organization, the internal auditor is answerable to the management. His duties, responsibilities, etc., regarding audit work are determined by the management. The management can increase the powers and authority of the internal auditor. Similarly, it can also curtail his powers. Statutory auditor, the auditor is independent of management. 5. The internal auditor points out irregularities in the procedural aspects and suggests ways and means to rectify the same. He assures that the financial operation and other types of control enforced are carried out in conformity with the policies and procedures. The statutory auditor is concerned with the legality and validity of all the transactions of businesses. His audit work is based on the financial statement prepared by the business.
Keep going.
Okay. System of internal checks. Internal checks is a system enforced in business under which the recording of business transactions is arranged in such a manner that the work of one staff member will automatically be checked by others. Spicer and Pegler have defined a system of internal check as an arrangement of staff duties whereby no one person is allowed to carry through and record every aspect of a transaction, such that without collusion between two or more persons, fraud is prevented, and at the same time, possibilities of errors are reduced to a minimum. DePaula has defined internal checks as a continuous internal audit carried on by the staff itself, whereby each individual is independently checked by another member of staff. Thus, under internal check system, staff duties are so arranged that no one person is allowed to record every aspect of the transaction, and the entire work is distributed among the various members of the staff in such a manner that the work of one person is automatically checked by others.
Is this true? folks, before he goes on, in organizations where you work, no one person is allowed to do 2, 3, 4, and 5 things, or they shouldn't be. And pretty much everybody, depending on what you're doing, is seeing what the other person is doing, is checking it, is overseeing it, is hearing it, whatever the case might be. Is that true where any of you work?
No way I work, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it
Yeah.
should be true. If you work
Yeah.
in an organization where those things are not true, probably you need to either fix them if you could or leave. Because sooner or later, something stinky is going to go down. Now, you might miss it, but then you don't know. And that's the other problem with poor controls. When poor controls are in place or are non-existent, systems fail, organizations suffer losses, and all kinds of problems ensue. All right? Okay, keep going.
The essential elements of internal contract, the essential elements of internal checks are as follows. Existence of checks on day-to-day transactions. The check is to be carried out continuously as part of the routine system. The work is divided among the staff, and each staff is assigned a specific task. The work of each staff, through independence, is complementary to the work of another. The system of internal checks is increasingly recognized by the auditor, especially when the size of the concern is large. The existence of effective internal check system relieves the external auditor of detailed checking to a large extent. The extent to which an external auditor depends upon the system of internal checks is based on the procedural tests applied by him to find out the effectiveness of the system. However, the auditor cannot be relieved of his responsibility if he was found guilty of negligence, regardless of the fact that he had tested the internal in existence in the organization before he had accepted it as correct.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for that. Thank you very much. Excellent. Did a great job, notwithstanding the blah, blah, blah. All right. The key here is to note those essential elements that he talked about in terms. See, remember we talked about the internal audit department, the internal auditor, and now we're talking about the internal checks. And these checks are all designed. If you work somewhere where they're checking everything all the time, you are probably working in an okay place. If you work somewhere where they're not checking too many things too often, for some reason, you probably shouldn't be too comfortable. Because that leaves a lot of room for abuse, loss, error, fraud, and God knows what else. Okay? And so these checks are the result of the internal audit process, the internal control process. And notice these checks are done daily, continuously, divided among many members of staff so nobody could sneak off and do their own thing. And then something goes wrong because somebody decided to do something untoward. And everybody's working in everybody's space, checking, looking, seeing something. And this is always a good idea. Okay? It really does help to safeguard the assets and the reputation of the firm. And so, because of these internal audit processes called internal checks, it really does give the auditor a great degree of, the external auditor, a great degree of comfort when they come in, if they can find an audit department that works like this. Because pretty much, if they find an audit department with good internal checks going on, then they can say, wait a minute, we can actually rely on this information that is recorded because we've checked a few things and these audit people are on their game. If the accountant can determine that, they will happily go about doing some other parts of the audit work. If they cannot determine that, however, they will have a tendency from time to time to go through the whole process again to satisfy themselves. So if you're responsible for internal audit, you work in the audit department, your best bet is to continue to try to do the job as best you can, save everybody a lot of stress. All right. So that just leaves us now with one final soldier. Let's see if she's on the battlefield. Letitia, are you on the battlefield? Not really. Letitia, are you on the battlefield?
Yeah. Yeah, just settling in, just got off the road. Okay.
Are you multitasking as well?
Yes, sir. And
Wow,
excuse the noise in the back, my puppy.
Is it a girl or boy? Letitia, is it a girl or boy? What is that, girl or boy?
A boy. Okay. It's a boy. So the end part here we're reading.
Okay.
System.
Yeah, you're down to that section that says objectives of internal check. Are you there, Letitia? Hi, can you hear me? Letitia, we can't hear you clearly.
And errors that may be committed, member of staff, and to make it more difficult if any fraud is to be committed, two or more persons must collude together.
Okay, so Letitia's having some issues somewhere. Letitia, can you hear me? All right. I don't see Siobhan. Siobhan either got knocked out or he went to put out a fire. Can anybody else hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. I guess Letitia will jump back in shortly. All right, so let's look at this final part of the internal control process, which has to do with the objectives of the internal check process. Okay, clearly, it's no surprise that the first objective is to reduce any chance of fraud and errors. That's the whole idea. Okay, it's still a primary function. It's still an important part of the entire process. What does it profit us to check everything when the financial statements and records are full of frauds and errors? A very key objective right at the very top. Secondly, to detect fraud and errors and correct them right away. Not to detect them and say we'll get back to them and never get back to them. Right? Frauds and errors should be dealt with immediately, not 15 minutes later, immediately. Okay? It's designed to bring moral pressure so that everybody feels like, hey, so everybody's watching me. And chances are everybody is watching everybody. And that's what we want. Because the more watched people are in the environment, the less likely they are to embark upon some hanky panking. It increases efficiency because then people are assigned specialized duties which they can focus on and they can learn it well and they can do it faster. And as a result of all of these key things, there's great efficiency in the day-to-day operation. People are nimble, well-trained, just like a Marine, and they get things done. Okay? Of course, let's not forget this other objective, and that is to come up with an accurate and reliable set of business records. It's absolutely crucial. We have to make sure that our records are accurate, and usually if they're accurate, they tend to be reliable. Usually if they're inaccurate, they tend to be unreliable. So those two go hand in hand. So if those are the objectives, then what are the essentials? Well, notice carefully the essentials of the internal check system. One, no single staff should have absolute control over the recording of all aspects of business transactions by him or herself. Never. I don't care how many emergencies you have. No single person should be allowed to do it. Does that mean that everybody's dishonest? No. Just means that some people are. It just means that some people might not be competent enough to do that. And therefore, if left alone, they're not dishonest, they're just not able to do it. So you have a big mess on your hands. Okay. All right. Certain staff should not have access to certain areas of the accounting records or computer or any other thing for that matter. You should only have access to those areas that you have to work with. A major control flaw in many companies. Okay? It's not supposed to be that way. If you process journal entries only, and you go in the computer, that's the only thing in the computer that you should be able to access. If you're going to access anything more, it has to be approved. See, these are all control systems. And not just approved by the IT manager only. Oh, wait. They have to be approved by somebody independent of the IT manager. Otherwise, you might be setting yourself up for a major problem. Each member should be responsible. Well, that's a given, it seems, but in practice, it doesn't always work that way. We talked about specialization of duties, which has to do with specific work. Your job is to do this, your job is to do that, et cetera, et cetera. Typically, that works for the most part. Nothing is perfect, but we need to have these things in place, these elements. All staff who are responsible for assets should take what? Annual leave. Why, anybody? Why should people go to work at least vacation once a year? At least, minimum. Anyone? Why is that an element? Take vacation. Why?
Well, hello,
Hi.
hello.
Hi.
Yes, it allows for change in duty, and also to, even if it's for someone else to perform those tasks to make sure things are in order.
Absolutely. Couldn't put it better myself. Simple as that. And anybody, when you have a staff member, say, Lucy, when you going on vacation? I don't need no vacation. I love my work. Is that good? Not according to this. Persons who are responsible for records and transactions, et cetera, cash and all that kind of stuff should go to vacation at least once a year, if not twice a year. So that somebody else can work with it. And if there are any problems going on, that person will detect it. We used to have an old saying back in the old days, beware of people who don't want to take vacation. What does that really mean? And so in recent years, organizations have been proactive. If you want to accumulate vacation, they won't let you. They'll tell you, they'll give you a minimum. They say you can break it up, but you cannot take it into the next year. If the next year rolls around and you don't do it, you'll be forfeiting your right to it. Very important stuff. Also, attempts should be made to introduce any kind of mechanical devices such as a cash register, such as a computer, such as electronic software like QuickBooks, whatever, to prevent misappropriations. Typically, for example, the machine, once the money goes in, and the machine tape comes out at the end of the day, whatever's on that tape should be in the box, in the till. And if your heart starts beating because you realize that it's not gonna be what's in the till, then chances are you need to get ready to explain. But the whole idea is definitely to create a situation where that can happen. For sure. Books and vouchers and accounting documents and other papers, etc., should be properly classified and available. If auditors have trouble getting information or not getting it at all, your company is going to have a problem with that auditing firm. And that's the same kind of feeling you should have when your internal audit people ask for stuff. Is our internal audit will get it when we feel like. Then internal audit will then have to take measures, write it up. I requested information a week ago, you have not yet given it to me, put on your file. Then everybody starts hating on everybody. But basically, these things are required. Proper records must be maintained. Not throwing stuff in the garbage and box and bags and all that. I mean, you could still come up with accounting records from it, but it's far more difficult. Okay? Very important elements. Very important elements. Electronic general ledgers inside the computer, you just put in the information in the computer and the system will do the rest so long as it's programmed to do the correct thing. Okay. Notice as we come to the bottom of page 69 on the elements, the element before the end on that page, no undue importance should be given to any staff member, and too much reliance on any staff member should be avoided. In other words, anybody knows what that means? What does that mean? No undue importance should be given to any staff member, and too much reliance on any staff member should be avoided. Why is that?
Is it some form of favoritism?
Yeah, it could end up being some form of favoritism or nepotism, and usually when that happens,
Yeah.
something is going to go wrong. Or if you put too much reliance on certain people, when they can no longer live up to it, or something happens to them, or whatever the case might be, not only you, but your organization as a whole can suffer.
Organization.
Okay? By all means. So these are some very careful elemental things that you need to be thinking about if your internal process and your internal checks are going to be effective. Okay? For sure. Staff duties must always be divided. Always. There should be always room for checking of work. Somebody prepares it, somebody checks it, somebody authorizes it. Like it used to be in the bank back in the day. I hope that's still the same thing. Somebody prepares it, somebody checks it, somebody authorizes it. Bankers in the room, is that how you do it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the ideal way to do it. Okay, for sure. And then finally, I made a few notes here about a couple of areas where internal checks should always be conducted no matter what is going on. Always be checking these things. Even if you're not an internal auditor, and now that you've done this auditing class, you're doing it, at some point now you could go and like feeling froggy, write a letter to somebody, appropriate person, and say, hey, I've just been thinking that at minimum, internal checks should be conducted on the following areas in this firm. Of course, everybody's going to look at you funny, like, well, why do we waste our money sending it to that person? Now they're here asking us questions we don't want to hear. But you are required to ask them as an internal audit person, okay? Or external for that matter. Cash sales. See, the almighty cash. If you don't watch cash, you will lose it. Not everybody steals the money, but many people do. And one of the greatest weapons you can create against yourself in a particular organization is when you don't have any control over your cash. Okay? For sure. Whether it's money coming in the mail, that's another problem. I don't know why people do that still. It should never happen. Especially in those US and other countries around the world with the mailboxes near the road or sitting up near the front door. Anybody can come open it, walk up with it. Total madness. I don't know who came up with it. Maybe that was old school, but maybe it's time for a change. All right. Purchases, sales again, wage payments. These are all cash intensive areas within a firm. And if you're not checking them, you're going to lose sales. You're going to lose money. And if you don't be careful, you may even lose your influence, your job, your reputation, whatever the case might be. Okay? So all in all, the internal controls should always lead to an internal audit function of some kind, and the internal audit function should lead to internal audit checks. And these checks should look at the objectives that we discussed and all the elements that should be impacted by the internal auditor, or by extension, the external auditor. All right, any questions, anyone? On the internal control process. Of course, not a difficult chapter, just a lot of little bits and pieces to remember. But I'm sure you guys will be fine with that. Any other questions? Okay, great. If that's the case, then I will let you guys go a few minutes earlier tonight. I will send the remaining modules to you between the next 48 hours or so that you can begin looking at those and reading up. And when we come next week, we'll pick it up with the next module, which is module number. Anyone?
Six.
Number 6. Thank you very much. All right. If there are no other questions, you guys please be safe out there. And I shall see you next week, Monday, same time. Please get back in one piece.
Okay,
Good night.
Good
Good
evening,
night.
good night, everyone.
Good night.
okay,
Night.
good night.
Good night.
Really?